Welcome to SSI Meetup. Today we are celebrating with Drummond Reed, who was our very first guest, and not only guest, he has been like early supporter and participant of SSI Meetup from the very beginning, as I said, in the very first show. And today we celebrate 1 year. And to celebrate this 1 year event, Drummond is joining us today to talk about the recent highlights of the Internet Identity Workshop in San Francisco, which he attended. He will tell you more about the other ones he attended before. And we're just gonna quickly go through slide number 2 to tell you quickly what SSI Meetup is about. So basically what we're trying to do is to empower global SSI communities that are open to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a company, persons anywhere in the world that is interested in this, or a project working in SSI, or an association. This is for everyone, and we hope you can reuse it. And the way to reuse it is that we have a Creative Commons by Share Alike license, which is basically an open source license, which allows you to reuse all this material that we're publishing here today, and in all the previous shows before too. The only thing you have to do is to give credit back to Drummond and to SSI Meetup when you use it, please. And as always, you know, we will be uploading the video that we're recording right now. You will have access to the Google Slides and to a SlideShare deck also. And so basically everything is free and available for you to reuse to share the SSI power around the world. And Drummond doesn't need much presentation because he's so well known in the SSI world and beyond that too. He did the first 2 shows we did for Drummond for SSI Meetup. Both of them have been quite successful for the SSI world. I mean, check them out. They have more than 2,500 views each. And today Drummond will be giving us an update about what happened at IIW and also tell us a little bit about himself. Welcome, Drummond. Great to have you again.
Alex, thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be back and thrilled to be sharing highlights of a very unique event. It is, I think, the major event and happens twice a year in the SSI industry. And I'll explain. I haven't missed one. I've been in the space 20 years, but IIW is 14 years old. There have been 28 instances, and as I said, I've been to every one. I think there are like 4 of us that have been to all of them. And so, yeah, I've been in the space a long time, and I wear a lot of different hats, and I'm going to be talking about almost all these hats as we talk about the highlights of IIW 28. So just a little bit of background on this conference for folks that are not familiar with it. It started, the very first one is in Berkeley, California. Had about 60 folks at it, including Kim Cameron, the chief identity architect of Microsoft, which talked about his laws of identity that he just published back then. And that's where OpenID was born, you know, to really become a protocol for the internet. And the only really strong conclusion that came out of the first one was, well, we got to do this more often. We got to have this kind of, there's so much to do here. So we decided to do it not annually, but every 6 months. And the next one, Kalia, Phil Winley, Doc Searles that put it together, chose its Computer History Museum in Mountain View, and they've all been there since then. So we're very, very familiar with that space. If you want background, extensive notes are taken of all the sessions at IIW and compiled into a book of proceedings, which I think started pretty early on. I'm not sure the very first ones had it, but I think ever since like the 5th or 6th one, they've had it. And all of those are available at the URL there at the bottom of the screen. So you can, you know, I'm going to give you highlights, but if you want to drill in any of the sessions that I talk about here, that's the place to go. So just to give you a sense, roughly 200 people. I think the biggest ever has been about 250 or 260. This one had 230. It was quite a large one. That's what you get on the first day, the Tuesday, and then it tails down a little bit. Some people are not there for day 2. Day 3 ends up being one of the most interesting, the Thursday, because it's down to really sort of a lot of core folks that are closing on discussions, and some of the most interesting discussions happen that day. So if you're ever thinking of attending IIW, I do recommend, if you can do it, to do all 3 days. The whole thing uses open space technology. If you're not familiar with it, there's a link there, a great Wikipedia article that explains there's no preset agenda. Everyone comes and there's a sort of briefing exercise the first morning, and then everyone gather in a giant circle, and people write down the sessions they want to hold, and then they announce them on 8.5 by 11 cards. Then they go to a giant board where there's 12 different meeting rooms and 5 different slots every day, hour-long slots, and you arrange all your sessions, and people try and arrange sessions so they can go to other people's sessions, and it never ever works out. And so there's lots of informal discussions. There are tables everywhere you can just sit down and meet, and there's also 2 all conference dinners on both nights. So it is the most fertile, highest bandwidth conference I've ever been to, and that's why it's got a very devoted audience. So before I go into my highlights here, I just want to make sure you understand I'm just one person of 230 that were there. And even I tried hard knowing I was going to be doing these highlights, and because there were so many great sessions, to get to all the sessions. And even then, sometimes you get into meetings or conversations where you miss sessions. I, of course, self-selected the topics I'm most interested or involved with. So you're going to get one set of highlights from me. And I've already compared notes with several of the people who were there, who we had some common takeaways and they had different takeaways. So please understand, you're going to get one person's view of this whole thing. And I've tried to sort of rationalize it into a set of key takeaways. In fact, there's 6 of them, and I'm gonna talk about each of them in order here. And if questions come up, Alex, during each of these, I'm going to pause at the end of each of these 6 sections, and if there are questions about what I've covered there, we can go into it, and we can also do more at the end.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, let's do that, because I forgot to mention that for anyone joining us live now, please drop your questions in the questions tool, and I'll bring them up to Drummond.
Perfect. So takeaway number 1, and this was very widely felt there, DIDs, decentralized identities, were everywhere. They were they have become the lingua franca of SSI. The very first session, I think the first session, the first day, there were several sessions on DIDs, and it's just they really, because they solved this really critical problem of providing this cryptographic root of trust for everyone, for all the roles in an SSI ecosystem, the issuers, holders, and verifiers of credentials, and they can be adapted to any decentralized network of any kind of blockchain, DLT, IPFS. Well, cover in a minute. They're just spreading. And I listed all of the DID methods that were actually being shown in use at this, and I'm certain I missed some. So if I'm not saying the list in the last bullet here is comprehensive, but all of those I saw myself. Now, 2 of those are based on the side tree, essentially decentralized network overlay. It's called an overlay network that Microsoft has been developing, or I said primarily Microsoft. It's in the Decentralized Identity Foundation as a project on SideTree, and I think there's a big announcement coming next week at Consensus. And so I won't say anything more specific about that, other than I think it's getting pretty real. And there are 2 SideTree as an overlay network has actually been adapted or bound to an underlying decentralized network, and so ION is going to be the binding to Bitcoin, and Element is the binding to Ethereum, and they're actually coming from 2 different implementers. A really cool new company called Transmute is doing the Element method. So anyway, they're out there all over the place. Now, I'm going to be using this stack diagram to help explain and put some of these things in context. If you're wondering why DIDs are everywhere, they are the bottom layer of the SSI stack here. This 4-layer architecture that the space is converging around, and it's any network that you can write a DID method for can support what is called a public DID. Now, you'll notice at layer 2 that we have this line here, private pairwise pseudonymous DIDs. I'm going to cover this in just a minute. So DIDs can live at either of these 2. Public DIDs are what you need to be able to look up and verify for others, especially issuers of credentials. But when you're forming your own direct peer-to-peer relationships, those don't need to be on a ledger. Those can be directly in the agents and wallets that are going to communicate here. So two more points about DIDs. First, they're becoming so popular that the issue of them actually being decentralized has become a hot topic. And I'm speaking now as a member of the credentials community group at the W3C, where the DID spec is currently, we're completing what we call a community final draft, but we're also preparing, W3C is coming soon, I think within the next 2 months, a vote on a full DID working group at the W3C. And this is very significant because it's the first new identifier format that the W3C will be charting a working group to pursue, precisely because of all of its qualities. Now, the popularity of DIDs means that now folks are starting to propose methods that would not, many people don't consider decentralized. And I give you two examples right here, right? DID : Facebook. Is there going to be such a thing? Is that really decentralized? So IIW has become a place where real work gets done on these things. The next slide here shows the very first session called the first day, or in the very first time slot, was by Joe Andrew, who's one of the co-chairs of the credential community group. And this was, the CCG decided at IIW, let's hold a set of sessions to get input from the community about what really makes a decentralized system decentralized, and why is that important? And so we had like 30 people in that room, and a lot of them were brand new to DID, so there was a lot of education that had to happen very quickly. Joe then held another session the next day on what they called rubrics for DIDs, which is how do we come up with a set of guidelines that you can use to sort of test, is a DID method actually decentralized? Does it meet the goals of decentralized identifiers for SSI infrastructure? And I'm not going to go over all the points on this board, but I think we ended up with just about 20 of them. And Joe is condensing those down into a recommendation for both the DID spec, the community final draft, and also for the charter for the working group. So I think it's really exciting that there's this much interest going into how can we make sure we have quality DIDs. And then the last point I want to make is peer DIDs. What I pointed out there at that second layer of the DIDs that you can exchange to get pairwise pseudonymous connections. Now a lot of folks are really recognizing that was something we really pioneered in the Hyperledger Indy project, but now it's being recognized that this really is a great idea. It's privacy by design at a very large scale. The peer DID method, technically DID : peer : has been published. There's a link here to the DID method registry, that informal registry maintained by the CCG. And I'll talk in a minute about how that's going to be built into the Hyperledger Aries code base. So that's my highlight takeaway number one on DIDs are everywhere. So I'll pause, Alex, and say, are there any questions about that before I go to number two?
Yeah, there's one question here. Just give me one sec. It's from Ala. He's saying, are private or consortium blockchains suitable for DIDs, especially for government use cases?
I think my answer is going to be a qualified yes, meaning the real thing, and the stack diagram is going to help here. I'll go back to it in a minute. What matters with the DID is it's the address of the public key and the agent of the issuer of credentials. And therefore, if whatever trust community you have that needs to trust those credentials needs to trust the source of that DID. It needs to say that I really believe when I look up that DID and I get the public key and the agent endpoint, that I believe that's true. That's not being spoofed in some way. So it comes down to your trust in that underlying system, that underlying network. If a private blockchain has been put together for a particular government or company or supply chain or whatever, if the users of that system trust that blockchain, then yes, it's totally fine to have DIDs on that. I think what's happening is they're going to become a standard feature of blockchains in general. For instance, Hyperledger Fabric, which is a general purpose permission blockchain for business, didn't have any notion of DIDs 2 years ago, and now there's work going on to just build them in, so that it's something Fabric will support natively.
Great, that's it for the time being.
Okay, all right, we'll go on. Again, I'm back to the diagram here because we're going to be working our way up the stack here. The point I want to make, or that I'm about to get into, is that DIDs at this bottom layer and the pairwise pseudonymous at this layer form the basis for everything that's going to be happening above. So now, second major takeaway: agents were everywhere, and this was, you know, the first IIW where suddenly it wasn't something people were talking about; people were actually showing them. Layer 2 of the stack is where all the action is right now, today, as in, and agents, the term agents really comes out of the Hyperledger Indy community, but it's starting to be used more broadly because of the stack. It's just the software that acts on your wallet to accept credentials, to share credentials, to form connections, is you know, being called an agent, and it's becoming really clear that we need interoperability. We need to converge on a single protocol for that layer 2. It's going to be fundamental to widespread adoption. So if you look at it here, it doesn't matter what underlying network it's coming from. What matters is that we have wallets that can accept any credential that an issuer wants to issue into those wallets, and then be able to form a connection and exchange it with any verifier that needs to you know, that will accept that credential to form a trust relationship. So this protocol at layer 2, which there's 2 terms being used for it, as you see here: agent-to-agent protocol. It's also being called the DID communications protocol, or DIDCOM, because it's DID to DID, or the connection, just like the IP protocol for TCP/IP for the internet is device to device. It's a peer-to-peer protocol that any 2 agents using any 2 DIDs anywhere are going to be able to use to connect and then exchange credentials to form a trust relationship. So folks are really looking now at this diagram, saying, yes, we've got to come up with one interoperable protocol for doing that, which I'll point out later is not actually part of the Verifiable Credentials 1.0 standard. That's the format for credentials, but it's not the protocol. Well, protocol stuff is moving, and I pretty widely acknowledge that the killer demo at this IIW was led by the BCGov team, and you can go. I put the link in here if you want to go and read all about this demo. They built and tested it, and it had 3 interoperable agent wallet implementations that anyone who wanted to do the demo, and they held sessions, I think, all 3 days, or at least the first 2 days. So basically taking people through it. But you didn't have to be at a session. You could just download one of the 3 agents and wallets that worked with it. And then you scanned the QR code to get a verifiable credential. First, you had to basically prove your email address. You had to literally go to a service that would send you an email. You had to verify your email address and then send you a credential saying, okay, your email address has been verified. You then had to present a proof of that credential to another service they built that would prove you actually attended IIW. You had to use the email address that you had registered for IIW to get that credential. Once you had both of those credentials, you were added to something they called the IIW book, which is technically a credential registry, and everyone who is in that could then click one button in their app to form a connection with anyone else in there, private, peer-to-peer, using the DID-peer method. And all of this was done on full, you download this. These are apps that are in the App Store. It's not a long-term production service. It was actually done against a network, an Indy network that they set up for this. But it's it is a good demonstration of exactly how this, I believe, how this stuff is going to start to grow, and how we will move to having so anyway, you can, if you weren't actually at IIW, you obviously can't do the whole thing, but you can go read and see screenshots of the whole thing at this link here. And this actually is a diagram of the steps you go through to first get your email verified, and then to go to the issuing service. So people, I'd say at least half the folks at the conference actually did this, and there was a lot of buzz about it, because like, okay, this stuff is really getting real. Now, last thing I want to say about agents, and a lot of folks have been exposed to the term hubs, right? And hubs are another way to approach what's going on in layer 2 there. They are, agents and hubs are not the same thing. A hub is a personal data store and a replication and data sharing service or implementation. Its home is the Storage and Compute Working Group at the Decentralized Identity Foundation, or DIF. And the hub and agent communities have been talking back and forth for quite a while, like the last 3 IIWs. And both of them have been advancing, and both are frankly really cool technologies, and they're not competitors. What's really rising is the agents and hubs do different, very complementary things. And it's an oversimplification to say that a hub is just a certain kind of agent, or that agents just plug into hubs. They actually are, again, complementary technologies. What's going on is everyone's recognizing that if agents and hubs can both speak using a unified protocol, layer 2, then things are really cooking with gas. And the two teams of architects, most of the leaders of both of those were there. They held multiple sessions just on this. There's some of the best sessions, I think, there. And I think it's looking good to get to a unified layer 2 protocol. Again, I think I have a picture of, I'll get back to that here shortly. So the one other thing in this, as in terms of agents everywhere, were on Thursday morning, the Hyperledger Technical Steering Committee met and approved a new project proposal called ARIES. ARIES takes the agent and wallet work that was going on under Hyperledger Indy, breaks it out into a separate project at Hyperledger that's going to be completely ledger neutral. So it is now the layer 2 project at Hyperledger. Will work with any DID method from any DID network, and it will have the DID peer method built in. So this is really where all the work at Hyperledger now will be concentrated on standardizing and having a de facto, called a reference implementation of layer 2. The agent, the wallet, the protocol for establishing and connections with pairwise to pseudonymous DIDs, and the resolution code built in for called, popular public DID methods. So I think, I personally, this is one of the most important milestones in the ecosystem. And again, that work is attracting folks that are not, the consensus at Uport folks, folks that are not working at Microsoft, folks that have not been working inside the Hyperledger system, so or ecosystem. So we're getting to I think a much greater focus now on interoperability that will lead to broad adoption of SSI. So I think this is the last thing I have in takeaway number 2. Any questions queued up, Alex?
It's okay for the time being.
All right. So, I guess I did have a little bit more here about ARIES. So this is the Hyperledger greenhouse, and the 2 projects that exist right now in there that are SSI, our Hyperledger Indy, which is where it all started. Now, if you're not aware that the crypto library that was there at the heart of that got broken out because the crypto there and the crypto of the other projects, finally Dave Huseby, the security maven at Hyperledger, convinced everyone they should break it out into a single consolidated crypto project that all the Hyperledger projects can use for crypto, and anyone else, right? The more peer review of a crypto library, the better it is for everyone. So those are the two that exist today. And what's happening now is Aries is going to be the next thing that goes on to this. They're going to have to get a bigger greenhouse.
Drummond, just one that came in from Jan. He's asking, are there any bigger deployments of DIDs out there that you're aware of?
I would say the answer is no. I'm going to talk about one that there are almost 10 million credentials that have been issued using exactly two DIDs, one for BC Gov and one for Ontario. So I don't know whether you call that big deployment, that there are 10 million credentials that have been issued under that, but it only involved two DIDs because an issuer only needs one DID to issue as many credentials as it wants. So I don't think we're seeing broad populations yet. That is coming.
Great.
And the last thing I will show here, just because for folks, that, and this is a little deeper technical slide, but I wanted to pull this one graphic from the Aries proposal that was approved by the Hyperledger Technical Steering Committee, because it shows you now the architecture, what this looks like. You've got Indy now at the bottom is still going to be the code for, call it an SSI, a dedicated SSI or DID network ledger or blockchain. Again, anyone can create one with that, and there are others. Obviously, Sovrin is one, but there are others that are now building Indy-based DID networks. But the agent code that Aries is doing here, you can see it's wallet-y things, agency things, because all of these functions are, need to be together in a code module for security. Now, all of these use now URSA for the crypto library, and then they can use any form of storage that the agent is designed to use, which is one way that it can plug into hubs. So just wanted to let folks know they can dive into detail here at this link on the Hyperledger Wiki, and that's our agent segment. So if there are not any other questions, let's dive into takeaway number 3. Surprise, surprise.
Just one more about, as usual, about DIDs. Is it possible to create a DID on a derivation of state identity like an EID or an e-passport?
The answer, I believe, is yes. There are several DID methods that are based on, addresses on blockchains or distributed ledgers. So I think anything that is any number that represents a verifiable state and an address at which a DID document can be either retrieved directly or that the components of the DID document can be retrieved and assembled by a resolver, can work as a DID. So that's the best answer I think I can give in a short one. That's a pretty advanced question.
Great. That's it for the time being.
Okay. All right. So the next thing that was everywhere, verifiable credentials, right? And I had to use this analogy. Irony is I haven't actually seen Avengers Endgame yet because I've been so busy with IIW. But they really are, they're the heroes of SSI. They carry all the weight. And what I see happening in just many conversations there is the realization of the power of the trust triangle. And the trust triangle is, this is SSI 101, that you've got issuers and credentials to holders who then produce proofs of those credentials, verifiers. And that the differentiation between a credential and a proof is actually very important because the actual data that's in the credential, the actual attributes, do not always have to be exposed whenever it's not like in the real world, get out your driver's license, get out your passport, you're always showing all the information there unless you carefully try and cover stuff up. In the digital world, that's not necessary at all. And there are multiple techniques, not just zero knowledge proof to cryptography, but other ways you can limit the information that you're disclosing while still proving that it's really true. This issuer really gave this to this holder. So this trust triangle and the power that this can be adapted to any issue of trust on the internet is this is what's really starting to wake up the world to the power of the SSI stack and the ecosystem. So there were just one thing is the fact that the verifiable claims working group that is the producing verifiable credentials data model is, I think it was a week or 2 weeks before IIW, it put out a first CR. It's called the candidate recommendation. It is basically end of the work before it goes into final approval processes at W3C. So that's a pretty good indication of maturity. There's still a lot of discussion around that, but there are 3 major formats that I've listed here that are going to be supported in the 1.0 standard. And so obviously interoperability between these 3 formats is a key question that everyone's working on, but at least we're far enough to where these things now can go into broader production. Again, I'm back to the stack to just show that once you have the plumbing we've been talking about, now you can really start to have these ecosystems of verifiable credentials come out, every one of which represents a trust triangle. And what's also starting to appear is that you can now actually start to model workflows and business processes and you know, consumer to government interactions that BC Gov is focused on, for example, all with sequences of verifiable credentials. So it's pretty exciting. And well, actually, I'll stop there for a minute because that's all I'm going to say about VCs. Any questions come up about those?
Kala mentioned that the work SIGBA is doing in Switzerland. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but at the last ICAO 2018, I
wasn't there, but I am familiar with the work they're doing. Yeah.
Okay. He's sharing that they did a reference EID passport to credentials. From SIGBA in Switzerland in the last ICAO 2018, and that they're also they're also a sovereign steward. Another question coming in from Doug. Will this presentation? Oh, yeah, this presentation will be available. Afterwards, we will publish the video and we will share the Google Slides too. So once it's finished, as soon as it has been processed, it will be shared. Yeah, that's it for the time being, Drummond.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, all these, that's one of the best things about SSI Meetup is all this is out in your hands to use any place. So interesting enough, layer 4 governance frameworks were not everywhere. As Alex knows, I chair the governance framework working group at the Sovrin Foundation, and we were just waiting to see if folks were going to want, you know, and it took until the 3rd day for enough people to say, hey, you know, what's going on with governance frameworks? Where does it fit into this? Are you going to hold a session on it? And Scott Perry, who I'll point out is the only actual web trust auditor who attended IIW. This was his first one. And he came away with his head pretty well blown going, okay, I got to be here from now on. He and I got together and on the last session, last day, we finally said, okay, we'll do a session on it, because once folks had seen everything else and been exposed to everything else, they finally had the context to understand this. And we only used one picture for the whole session, and guess what? It was this one. Because it's not until you understand the first 3 layers that suddenly the relevance of governance framework starts to come into focus. One of my very favorite things about this is a gentleman named Dave Crocker, who is one of the fathers of the internet. You can go look up the early RFCs. I think email and some of the very early stuff Dave's just an icon in the space, and he's a regular at IIW, and he's provided wonderful critique of as we progress through the development of all this architecture. So I love the fact that he came and was front row in this session to understand this, because he really wanted to look at the whole stack. And Dave Crocker is a very hard man to please. And we actually almost got him to smile in this session, because the key thing he wanted to understand, he said, well, is there are you talking about one governance framework for all of this? And we said, no, we're not even, this layer is for, what we're trying to do is standardize the roles in what will be thousands and tens of thousands or millions of governance frameworks, because they are all about establishing the trust needed within any particular trust community. And I have a picture here that if you understand the trust triangle, then this one picture will explain, oh, what is the problem a governance framework solves? You take a network where the verifiers don't know all the issuers, but if the verifier can say, oh, I trust a governance authority that knows all the issuers, and classic example, right? If there's no store in the world that knows all the banks in the world, but those stores know Visa and they know MasterCard, and they're governance authorities for governance frameworks for all the banks or all the credit unions or whatever, right? So anyone who shows up with a Visa card or a MasterCard and provides a proof by running it through a credit card machine, that's how the verifier knows they're going to get paid, right? So this is basically, it's all about how you scale trust in issuers and how you build the trust in specialized forms of credentials. Today we have a relatively small number of very large governance frameworks like the World Passport System or Visa or MasterCard. But what in an SSI ecosystem make possible is many governance authorities of all kinds, many governance frameworks. You might have one for your city or your school, or we had several universities actually in attendance in this session, and their light bulb came on going, we need to get together and do a governance framework for diplomas, right? So that there can be a standard way that any verifier, that all universities, for instance, can issue verifiable credentials of diplomas or educational degrees or of all kinds. And verifiers any place are going to be able to say, you can actually prove to me an employment application that you have a degree, you have a specific degree from a specific university. So anyway, it was great. Love this session, and folks came away going, whoa, okay, now we really see where this fits. Now, those governance frameworks, we call them domain-specific governance frameworks. These are three examples. Two of these three were in attendance there, and we actually had a session on the dignifieds. But CU Ledger, you've heard about in earlier webinars here on SSI Meetup. They're progressing nicely with their governance framework for a standard global digital credential credit union membership. I think they'll have more news coming out soon. There's probably another SSI Meetup webinar to have with them soon, Alex. In the UK, True is developing governance framework with NHS and the Post Office and the General Medical Council for doctors' credentials in the UK for, because doctors, it's National Health Service, and something like 15% of doctors' time goes into authentication as they move around between different hospitals. So that's make huge. And then there's a new one that's emerged. Chris Rezkowski was there together with gentleman Andrew, I can't remember his last name, but he is the retired chief medical or chief scientist, of the Humane Society. And they are working on they formed a nonprofit foundation to publish the Dignified Animal Guardianship Framework, SSI for Pets. And this is a very real thing. It's such a real thing that you might want to have a webinar on that in the next couple of months too, Alex. It is, they're very serious about it, and there's a big market for it.
Yeah, so, I love that one. I mean, just to mention, because Chris and his team, they're writing a chapter in the book we're doing with Drummond about SSI. And it's a very beautiful chapter, and it's very persuasive about how this is relevant to animals and to the world, actually.
Yes, it's poignant that I relate to that. My wife and I have cats. I grew up with dogs, but we have cats, and our 17-and-a-half-year-old cat went to heaven while I was at IIW, and I had to console my wife remotely. And I told her, well, I'm working on the SSI for pets, so we'll Not that that was any consolation, but it just happened to happen at that time. So when we had that session, everyone got out their phones and were showing pictures of their pets. So anyway, this is happening. If the folks listening to the webinar are going, oh, maybe I need a domain-specific governance framework, you probably do. Feel free to get in touch, and we'll get you talk to the right people. Last points I want to make about this. This role that we have in the stack that you see in this credential registries, this is a new thing that verifiable credential architecture makes possible. And it's basically because when a credential is issued, it doesn't always have to be issued to the holder of to the subject of the credential. Meaning, if you're a business, for instance, and you're getting a business license, the authority issuing that, in the case of the British Columbia, it's the BC corporate registries, they can issue that credential to another service. And what BC Gov set up is a credential registry where all of the credentials issued by all 31 agencies that issue credentials to businesses of any kind in BC are going to send also issue the same credential to this registry they call the org book. The org book already has almost 1.5 million credentials of business registrations in it, in full production. You can go to and they design, not only, it's all open source software, which has already been contributed to, or they made the commitment to contribute. They're putting in the repo to Hyperledger. It might even become a separate project in itself called Catalyst. But they are wanting to actually connect credential registries around the world, from, and not just governmental ones, but anyone that wants to run a registry into this thing they call a Verifiable Organization Network. So if you're at all interested in that, check it out, vonex.io. The folks that attended our session really was like, oh wow, credential registries, it's a way that lots and lots of different types of organizations and even individuals, I think, will be able to prove things about themselves that they want to be able to prove publicly. So here's again a picture of the Vonex website. One last point about this, we've always had lawyers and policymakers interested in IIW. New fellow named Christopher Savage that I'd heard about my first chance to meet him had a great session he called Occam's regulation on how the SSI community should actually talk with regulators about doing the minimum possible to just support SSI infrastructure and not have to and not get in the way with overly burdensome regulation. And the simplest first step, Chris Brown was there. He's about to go meet, I think, next week with the Wyoming legislature is trying to, in the US, the state of Wyoming is trying to be a leader in blockchain legislation. So he is going there to tell them, you don't have to do much, like maybe just legislation that says verifiable credentials are legally valid as credentials, just as valid as paper, which is what most jurisdictions now recognize for digital signatures. If it's electronic, it's still valid. And if they can decide the same thing about verifiable credentials, it'll just help with adoption. So I think that's my last slide on takeaway number 4. Any new questions, Alex?
Yeah, we have 2 questions here. One from Doug. He's asking very many questions today about governments. How close are we to US Gov or US state governments to legislating SSI into acceptance? Also, are they looking at BC Gov as an example?
So yes, definitely to the second one. And BC Gov, in my opinion, does a great job of, they will take time and talk to almost any government or government agency in the world that's interested in their work. And that's helping them, because the more their own government is seeing their leadership, the more resources they're getting. So it's a great question. In the U.S., there are several states that are, in the leadership position there. I'll call out the ones I'm aware of: Maryland, Illinois, Arizona is looking at actually has a legislation that's already legislated digital driver's licenses. Wyoming is known for the blockchain legislation it's put out. My own home state of Washington has finally got some blockchain legislation going. So now it's pretty general, called overall blockchain right now. It's not yet really focused on verifiable credentials and DIDs. We believe that's coming, and I say we, I know folks at Evernym, at the Sovrin Foundation, at Hyperledger, and at other projects, Consensus and their team, the Uport, are talking to regulators all over the world, trying to bring them up to speed on the technology. EU Commission has a very strong interest in this in terms of how it can help with privacy and personal data control and portability. Ironically, what might end up being the biggest government stake in the ground, I understand, is coming in New Zealand, where the major telco down there, Spark, has actually spun out a new subsidiary, I think. But anyway, it's going to be a standalone company focused entirely on SSI. It's called Matter, M-A-T-T-R. And the folks there have told me that they're working with the New Zealand government to get DIDs recognized as the official digital identifier of New Zealand. I don't know. They seem to think it was not very far away, and I thought that was pretty amazing news. So stay tuned. But that's pretty much the state of what I know about where we are with governments.
Great. We have 2 more questions here from Jan, and if anyone else has a question, please jump in. Jan is asking, I'm new to SSI and the different layers. Do you understand in the right way that the governance framework is there to establish the roles, especially of issuers, so that subjects, holders, and verifiers are able to establish trust into the overall domain framework?
Yeah, I'll go back up to just bring this up as I answer the question. So the way I would put it is governance frameworks are there, and these 5 different roles that we identify here for governance frameworks, they are there to make it easy, easier, or maybe even very easy for verifiers to trust issuers for specific types of credentials. And so let me use an example to try and ground this. So we'll take CU Ledger as an example. It's a consortium of credit unions that want to establish a standardized digital credential for credit union membership. That's one single type of credential that they want any credit union to be able to issue to any member of a credit union. And to be a member of a credit union, you have to go through KYC, know your customer regulations, that are standard for financial institutions around the world. So they want this credential to be widely accepted, and they want it to be widely accepted not just among credit unions, right? They could write a governance framework that's just, hey, this is how all credit unions can issue this credential so other credit unions can accept it. But actually that credential is going to have a whole lot more value if they publish a governance framework that says, well, here's what the requirement for an issuer, right? You've got to be a certified credit union. You must have put your member through KYC. You must have done a few other checks before you issue this credential. And then you must maintain revocation registry. So if you ever discover that it was a problem, you can revoke the credential. If all those things are written into a governance framework, and I'll map in the roles up here. CU Ledger would be the governance authority that would be publishing that. The trust anchors in that governance framework are the credit unions. They're the authoritative issuers for that credential. CU Ledger could maintain a credential registry of all the issuers, meaning a verifier wants to find out, well, someone's giving me a MyCUID, proof of MyCUID credential. Is it really coming from a real credential issuer? If CU Ledger maintains a credential registry of all the governance, all the credit unions out there that are authorized, it's trivial. It's a trivial proof for the verifier to know, yep, it's a real MyCUID credential, came from a real credit union, you're in. And these last 2 roles are actually very easy to explain. Auditors are there to basically make sure that, like, your credit union would get audited to say, are you really doing what the governance framework requires, so you can be confident in this credential. And auditor to creditors, when you have a large enough network, you actually want to outsource the job of accrediting auditors who, all around, for instance, CU Ledger, something like 65,000 credit unions. And so auditing all those credit unions is going to require, many auditor companies around the world. So you hire auditor accreditors like Kantara Initiative, for instance, is one. So all of these up here are all these roles are defined to help build a governance framework that just makes it easy for verifiers to decide, can they trust a credential from an issuer? I hope that helps answer the question.
I think so, absolutely. Jan is asking also, are you aware of the state of DIDs, VCs in the wider world, EU in particular?
Yeah, I think I am pretty aware, and I would actually say that Europe is leading. The interest in DIDs as a pairwise pseudonymous identifier, right, at this layer, and the ability of EU citizens to start to use SSI agents and wallets to share personal data under their control in the form of verifiable credentials is just about a dream of the EU Commission and the regulators there in terms of how this would work. Now, today, what they've got is something called EIDAS, the Electronic Identification ID and Authentication Service. So what they're trying to do is standardize the use of government credentials across the EU, and they've got an electronic form for it. So there are folks involved directly that are EIDAS experts. I'll call out InfoCert, which is the largest certificate authority in Europe. And InfoCert became an early, they were one of the first 10 sovereign stewards and are actively working now on adapting the EIDAS regulations to basically come up with a domain-specific governance framework that will say, here's how we can do that same thing in SSI. If you have a EIDAS compatible government identity in the EU, if that governance framework will say, here's how that same issuer could issue a verifiable credential for that. And now you can use that, not just within the EU, but any place that government identity would be accepted. I'm not saying it's done yet. I think they're still in early stages of doing that mapping, but I believe there are even EU Commission projects being proposed for the EU Commission to fund that work so that it can advance more quickly.
Great. We have a question from Alexander. Alexander's asking, have you discussed at IIW personal data issues associated with DIDs and verifiable credentials, especially under GDPR legislation?
Yes. There was a session specifically around GDPR and verifiable credentials and DIDs. And it was a very productive discussion. We didn't have any actual regulators there to be part of it, but we got down into some of the specifics questions. One of the ironic issues is that if you're an individual, and you have an agent and a wallet, and you want to participate in this ecosystem, you too should be able to be an issuer, right, of your own credentials. You might be a blogger that says, I want to issue credentials about the other bloggers that I trust, or about, I want it to be verified that I, believe in a certain product, right, or I endorse a certain product, whatever it is. And if you too want to be an issuer and you want your digital signatures to be able to be widely verified, well, then you need a public DID. You can choose what network, but that public DID, even though it's pseudonymous, it's just a long number, it's still an identifier for you as an individual. And that means under EU, under the GDPR, that's personal data. But you are writing it to a blockchain where by definition, that's immutable. You can't go and erase it. And so you can see right there, folks familiar with EDPR and the right to erasure, that, well, we got a rock in a hard place. Do we want to empower individuals to be able to have that kind of control where they can use, public blockchains for proving their identity when they need to publicly? Now, I want to point out, private pairwise pseudonymous DIDs, no problem. Those are issued just between any two parties, individual can, share them with other people or with any commercial relationship. And those are easy to delete. Literally, if you want to, erase, you at your end can just terminate this connection. You don't even have to go back to the website and say erase me. That one of the things we want to do is standardize an GDPR compliant message of the right to erase. Also, consent receipts. There were several sessions on how consent can be done in a completely cryptographically verifiable way. So I think I happen in the wearing my sovereign governance working group hat. I know we're in very active discussions and have attorneys working on this that are part of the stewards. There's a separate global policy working group at the Sovrin Foundation. We're all wanting to work with the European Commission to optimize how SSI can not only be GDPR compliant, but can actually be one of the major ways that you can implement the spirit and empower people to have the personal data privacy and control and portability that is the purpose of GDPR legislation.
Wonderful. Jan is asking, what do you think about establishing registries via DIDs, VCs, and verifiable credentials compared to blockchain smart contracts, as an example, or land registry? Where do you see advantages, disadvantages of DIDs, VCs, or is this not a good use case?
No, actually, I think blockchain smart contracts are potentially ways to implement many of these functions up here. In fact, you could build into and design a smart contract to serve as a credential registry. Now, I'm not, how exactly you'd handle the data storage and the service there, but the process of accepting a credential published by an issuer to a registry, verifying it and like logging that happened at a certain time, it's almost a perfect kind of smart contract function. So I think I believe everything we're looking at in this picture is as suitable for particularly Ethereum. I don't, obviously Bitcoin doesn't natively have some of those functions, but all of this can and is being implemented in the Ethereum ecosystem. There's nothing about this architecture that is specific to any particular type of blockchain or DLT.
Great. David is asking, how will non-humans be prevented from obtaining or creating as many SSIs as they want, especially the threat of synthetic identities?
That's a very good question. It's like, SSI spam, right? What's coming here? I think the answer, I'm going to try and keep it short because we could spend a whole webinar on that subject, is it's right here in the trust triangle, meaning the way you will establish trusted connections is by being able to prove trust. So the actual request to establish a connection, there's some protections that can be built in there so that, for instance, you're not sitting there and getting spammed with connection requests. And one of the obvious ways you can do that is your agent, not you the human, but your agent can have a set of policies about what kind of connection request you will accept. And so literally your agent can be like the assistant at the front desk who says, can you prove why you need to have a connection, why you need any attention from the owner of that agent. And if the other party cannot provide that proof, no human attention will ever be used. Now, can you get into agent-to-agent DDoS? Yes, definitely. These are the kinds of things that, and there, by the way, guess what? Governance frameworks, right? If the others can prove they're part of some trust community that has accountability in it, that's how you're going to deal with spam in large part. As I said, very deep topic. It's a very good question, but one that I'm quite bullish about because, after all, this is all about establishing trust.
Great. Doug King is asking, can you describe a few main categories of business models emerging around SSI and credentials? How are for-profits looking to monetize?
You know what? I just realized I didn't finish my last two takeaways because we stopped on all the topics. So let me quickly go down and just, it's perfect. These are very short. To this point about SSI and IoT, it is a hot topic. And if you haven't seen the SSI Meetup webinar with Mernal Wawa, I now know how to pronounce his name. He was there. You definitely should see that. He and the folks from GS1 had 2 different SSI and IoT sessions. I didn't go to either one. That's how crowded it was at the conference. But I had a great talk with Mernal. This is really, there are an exploding number of use cases around that. So I just wanted to make that point. And lastly, business of SSI. This is my last slide here, and I just wanted folks to know. There have been earlier SSIs that had a lot more business focus. This one tended to be pretty heavy on the tech and the interop because so much progress is being made there. But Timothy Ruff of Evernym called a session on the first day on the business of SSI and was flooded with people coming in asking that same question about business models and startup ideas. And you should read the notes from that session because it was I wasn't there, but it was a great session. The next day he held another one with a smaller group, but literally there are a couple of entrepreneurs that left that conference going, I'm going to start up whatever their idea was. I'm also going to note the Sovrin Governance Working Group. The topic is hot enough. We're forming a set of task forces now that the second generation is done, and Business of SSI Task Force is one of them. So if you're interested in that, feel free to come in through the contact at sovrin.org or email me or Alex and let us know. I also put a great new blog post just came out this last week from Oscar van de Venter at TNO in the Netherlands that lists a bunch of different, sort of breakthrough business opportunities coming from SSI. I think the classic business model, if it's a new service, right? SSI is a service for individuals and for businesses. So they're, classic service provider. There are credential issuing opportunities. Credentials, verifiers will pay for credentials of all kinds that will provide value. And we're working to provide that infrastructure for payment to actually flow right over those connections. So imagine you can put up a service for which the verifiers are just digitally flowing funds in as they accept credentials from your holders. So I think that's a big one. I think that actually building and helping communities implement governance frameworks is also going to be a business opportunity. It's maybe a little bit more on the consulting side, but definitely see that as well. We probably need to arrange a whole nother SSI meetup, Alex, on the business of SSI and get some of the entrepreneurs that are focused on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just for everyone who's listening to know, we had Mrinal joining us, and he did a really good session about IoT and SSI. We did this like 3-4 sessions ago because this is session number 27. I think this was number 24. So just check it out on the website, SSIMeetup.org. And we also had True.id, which is a business case for the medical industry, hospitals in the UK, and a number of other ones. Just check out the different webinars we had so far. We will be doing more in the future. And actually for the book rewriting, if you go to identitybook.info, we will publish more information there in the future. We have plenty of chapters where we're writing about different use cases in different industries. Couple of comments here, no questions anymore, so I'm just gonna share them very quickly. Jan, yes, probably like tonight or maybe tomorrow, and we will be publishing the video and the slides, so you will be able to watch it again or share it if you want. Kala is just suggesting that what you just did, Drummond, is that with this presentation is to ensure that IIW will be exploding in visitors next time. So that's good news. And and Jan, feel free to ping me. I can connect you with Drummond, for example. Just write to contact@SSIMeetup.org. And Doug is saying he would love to have a business model SSI meetup. So we will for sure plan something like that in the coming 2 months. Maybe just need to find the right people to do something like that. Drummond, thank you so much as always. It was great. Any final comments from your side?
As you can tell, I've been to every IIW, and I always say, oh man, each one topped the last. This one was just amazing, and I've talked to a bunch of folks that attended it. The density and quality of content was outstanding. So I'm not trying to hype IIW because if too many people come, it will actually be hard. But it's a tremendous conference, and I think, Alex, my biggest takeaway is SSI is here for real. I mean, this industry is exploding, and by the way, just to pay you a compliment, a lot of folks literally they recognize me through doing SSI meetups, and they love these webinars. So I'm really glad. Congratulations on your 1-year anniversary. I hope the second year we're going to get even more and even deeper content, because this industry is really happening.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For anyone else who wants to keep on following up on new SSI meetups, just join us on Twitter, on our Telegram channel. We have an email distribution list on the website that you can join. We're on LinkedIn, on Facebook, all the usual suspects where you can be kept up to date. And we will be publishing this very soon with the presentation, slideshare, and the video. Thank you so much, everyone who joined us today. Thank you so much, Drummond, again, for having a wonderful session with you. And we will see all of you very soon again in our next session, which will be in 2 weeks, where we will be talking with a startup company from Argentina that has support from the Inter-American Development Bank, which is called DIDI, based on DID. And they will tell us a little bit about the use case, how they're trying to help people in the slums of Buenos Aires, and I know these people really well. And they're working really hard to create some financial inclusion around crypto and SSI in Argentina. And it is being led by the Bitcoin Foundation Argentina. So I very much recommend you to join that if you have time. We will be announcing that very soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Drummond, for being with us today again.
Thank you, Alex.
Bye.